The restaurant glowed with golden light, the clinking of glasses and gentle hum of chatter filling the air. He sat at a corner table dressed sharply in a navy suit that fit perfectly, but despite his polished appearance, there was a heaviness in his eyes. This was supposed to be a blind date, arranged by mutual friends who swore she would be his type. But across from him sat a woman who hadn't once looked up from her phone in the last 15 minutes. Her manicured nails tapped endlessly against the screen, laughter bubbling from her lips, but not for anything he had said. She was entertained by someone else entirely, someone on the other side of that glowing rectangle. He tried to start a conversation, speaking about travel, about books, even lightly about business, but each attempt fell flat. She responded with curt, or, "That's nice," without raising her eyes. The waiter came by to pour water, and even he shot the CEO a sympathetic glance, sensing the awkwardness stretching across the table. The woman finally lifted her head when her food arrived, snapping a quick photo before digging in, never once asking if he liked his meal, never once wondering how his day had gone. Inside, he felt the familiar ache of loneliness grow heavier. People always assumed his life was perfect, wealth, success, status, but in that moment, sitting across from someone who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, the emptiness pressed harder against his chest. He swirled the wine in his glass slowly, pretending to study it, trying to mask the disappointment that had become all too routine in his personal life. Around him, couples leaned closer, laughing together, sharing bites of food, fingers brushing hands naturally. He noticed it all, and it only sharpened the contrast of his situation. For a man who had built an empire, who could sign a deal that changed markets in an instant, he felt powerless in the face of something as simple as connection. With every second ticking by, it became clearer, this wasn't a date, it was a performance. And he was tired of playing the part of a man who had it all, when deep down, he had nothing that mattered most. He finally set down his fork and forced a polite smile, the kind of smile he'd perfected for boardrooms and investors, but it felt empty on his face. Quietly, he excused himself from the table. His date barely noticed, murmuring something distractedly as her eyes remained glued to her phone. Rising from his seat, he smoothed his jacket and made his way toward the door, his steps heavy with the dull weight of disappointment. Near the entrance, a young waitress was juggling a tray of dishes, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, strands escaping and framing her tired but kind face. She noticed him pausing there, almost as though he needed a moment before stepping out. His shoulders seemed strong, but his expression, low, defeated, was something she couldn't ignore. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, she shifted the tray to one hand and walked over, her voice soft but steady. "Leaving already?" He looked at her, surprised someone had bothered to ask. "Yeah," he said quietly, his lips curling into a rueful half-smile. "Guess tonight wasn't meant to be." She tilted her head, studying him for a second, and there was no judgment in her eyes, no curiosity for gossip, only a gentle sincerity. She pushed the door open for him with her free hand, stepping outside into the cool night air. "Sometimes," she replied with a light chuckle, "that's a blessing in disguise." The two of them stood there under the faint glow of a street lamp. Cars passed in the distance, and the muffled sounds of laughter still spilled from the restaurant behind them, but out here it felt quieter, almost like a pause in time. He inhaled deeply, the night air cooler than he expected, and for the first time that evening, he felt his chest lighten just a little. Her apron was dusted with flour, her shoes clearly worn from long hours of standing, but there was an ease in the way she spoke to him that he hadn't felt in years. No attempt to impress, no calculation, just a stranger offering a moment of comfort. She shifted the tray against her hip and smiled. "First dates don't always work out. Better to know early than waste your time, right?" He let out a small laugh, real and unforced. "You're right. You really are." She grinned, then nodded toward the dark street ahead. "Well, at least you're free to enjoy the rest of your night. Who knows, maybe something better's waiting out there." For a moment, he wanted to tell her how rare it was for someone to say something so simple, yet so grounding. But instead, he just held her gaze for a second longer, memorizing the warmth in her eyes before she turned back toward the restaurant. As the door swung shut behind her, he realized that in those brief moments outside, he felt more seen by a waitress than he had during the entire dinner with the woman who was supposed to be his date. He lingered outside the restaurant longer than he intended, as if replaying the softness of her words in his head. Something about the way she spoke, light, casual, but with quiet strength, pulled him in. When she stepped out again, balancing another tray to bring to the outdoor tables, he found himself blurting, "You seem happier than most people I know. What's your secret?" She blinked, surprised by his question, then laughed under her breath. "Happy? That's not the word I'd use." She adjusted the tray on her arm and leaned against the railing for a moment, giving herself a short break. "I just take things one day at a time. My little boy keeps me going." Something stirred in him at those words. "You have a son." Her face softened, eyes lighting up in a way he hadn't seen all evening from anyone else. "Yeah, he's 5. Smart, stubborn, and somehow already funnier than me. Every shift I work, every late night, it's all for him. He deserves the world, even if I can only give him pieces of it." He studied her, the sincerity in her voice hitting him harder than he expected. Most people he met spoke about what they wanted from him, what they could gain, or how they could impress him. She spoke about giving, about sacrifice, about love that had no conditions. "I admire that," he said quietly, almost more to himself than to her. She shrugged, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "It's just life. We don't get to choose everything, but we can choose how we handle it. And honestly, hard as it gets, he's worth every bit of it." For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt himself laughing, not the polite, empty laugh he used at corporate events, but something real. "You know," he said, smiling at her, "I run into people all the time who act like they've figured everything out. But you're the first person I've met who admits it's hard and still smiles through it." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head, teasing lightly. "Careful." That almost sounded like a compliment. "Maybe it was," he replied, and the two of them laughed together, the sound blending with the hum of traffic and the faint music spilling from the restaurant. For a fleeting second, standing under the streetlight with this woman who didn't know his name, his title, or his wealth, he felt lighter. She wasn't pretending to be someone she wasn't. She wasn't performing. And somehow, that honesty, ordinary, unpolished, raw, felt extraordinary. He realized then how starved he had been for something simple. For a voice that didn't flatter or negotiate, for eyes that looked at him without expectation. And here it was, coming from a single mom on her break, who had nothing to offer him but truth, and yet it felt like more than anyone else ever given. He walked slowly down the quiet street, the night pressing cool against his skin. For a while, he let his footsteps echo, pretending he was simply leaving the restaurant like any other evening. But something tugged at him, an urge to look back. And when he did, his breath caught. She was there, framed in the restaurant's doorway, pushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear as she hurried back inside. It was such a simple gesture, one she probably didn't even think about, yet it struck him with an unexpected force. It wasn't glamour, it wasn't rehearsed charm, it was just her. Real, unaware of how much she had already unsettled his carefully built world. He stopped walking, standing beneath the glow of a street lamp. For years, he had lived his life surrounded by polished surfaces and perfect masks. In business meetings, at charity galas, even on dates, everyone played a role. They wanted something from him: deals, favors, power, money. He had always known it. But tonight, in just a few minutes of conversation, a woman who barely knew his name had given him something no one else had: sincerity. She didn't want anything. She wasn't even trying. And that's what made it so rare, so disarming. He found himself smiling, not the forced grin he wore in photographs, but a quiet smile that warmed him from the inside. He imagined her rushing back to the kitchen, balancing plates, maybe sneaking glances at the clock, counting the hours until she could go home to her son. He pictured her sitting beside him, reading him a bedtime story, exhaustion heavy in her eyes but love pouring from every word. He imagined her laughing again, the way she had outside, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to be part of that world. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was a man who could buy almost anything, yet the one thing he wanted most, genuine connection, was beyond the reach of money. And here she was, a single mom working double shifts, not even realizing she had already given it to him. He turned his gaze back toward the restaurant one last time. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of her weaving between tables, her tired steps steady, her smile still intact despite the long night. She had no idea who he was, no idea that the man she had comforted was the head of a company worth billions. No idea that she had just planted something in him that meetings, contracts, and luxury could never provide: hope. As he finally resumed walking, his hands slid into his pockets, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He didn't know when or how, but one thought rooted itself firmly in his mind: this wasn't the last time he would see her. She had unknowingly broken through walls he hadn't even realized were still standing. And as the city stretched ahead of him, the lonely CEO carried a quiet certainty. He was falling, and falling fast, for the woman who had walked him out of disappointment and straight into possibility.